I remember the late afternoon air in the kitchen felt heavier than usual, a thick tension hanging between the walls that I had never noticed before. I was passing by the living room, just then coming back from my garden where I'd been fixing some old tools, when I caught pieces of a conversation that froze me on the spot. My daughter's husband, David, was speaking quietly but with an unmistakable urgency in his voice. Next to him was someone I didn't recognize, a man whose tone was equally low but sharp and insistent. I edged closer, heart pounding against my ribs like a warning drum, and listened with every fiber of me begging it not to be true. "We move fast," David whispered. 60% of his savings hidden in that offshore account. We just need the right documents, fake enough to slip past audits. He'll never suspect. My palms grew clammy. 60% of my life's work, the safety net for my daughter, my grandkids, all to be stolen by the man I welcomed into my family under my roof. I forced myself to stay silent, to breathe slowly, but rage and disbelief were swirling inside my chest like a storm. "You really think he'll never find out?" the other man asked. "What if he notices any discrepancies? Old Martin's careful, too careful." David scoffed, the arrogance dripping from his words piercing me deeper than any insult before. "He's soft, too trusting. Old fools like him don't see the real game. We're family. That complacency is our advantage." His voice hardened with greed and entitlement. I wanted to step forward and confront them, to scream and demand they leave this house, leave my bloodline alone. But a strange calmness settled over me. I swallowed every bitter emotion and retreated silently, my footsteps measured as I made my way upstairs. I felt like an intruder in my own home, humiliated that this betrayal was unfolding in the very rooms built on my sweat and sacrifice. Later that evening, David found me in my study. His eyes were bold, unapologetic, filled with a disdain that cut deeper than the words themselves. "You're too old to understand how things are done these days," he sneered. "We'll take care of what's owed to us. You don't have to waste energy trying to stop it." The insult stung, but what hurt more was the unspoken accusation that I was obsolete, a relic too slow to catch up, and this empire of mine was ripe for the taking. I said nothing. The storm within me raged silently while my face held the mask of quiet dignity. That night, I left the house under the cover of darkness. I needed air, space to think, to steady my heart that felt shattered yet strangely focused. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about the very foundation on which I had built my family. My mind raced ahead, already mapping out the path of restoration, of justice. Before leaving, I glanced at the framed photograph of my late wife on the mantel. Her eyes seemed to plead for calm, for wisdom. And I promised myself then, this humiliation, this wound to my soul, would not be left to fester. I would reclaim what was taken, not with wild anger, but with the steady precision of the man who had built a life from nothing. Silent in the night, with the house behind me and the first spark of plan kindling in my mind, I vowed quietly. Dignity would be restored and arrogance punished. Sitting alone in my modest study, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows over ledgers and old photographs, my mind drifted relentlessly back through the years. The memories came unbidden yet vividly, like a film quietly playing in the dark theater of my thoughts. The sacrifices, the promises, the dreams, every one etched deeply in my bones and blood. I turned a worn photograph over in my hands. My daughter, just a child in her mother's arms, eyes bright with hope and trust. It had been for that child, for her future and her family, that I had worked tirelessly, without complaint. I remembered the rustle of paper as I signed loan documents decades ago, the late nights poring over blueprints and balance sheets, the sense of responsibility heavier than any physical burden. Mortgaging the house to pay for her college tuition was a choice made without a second thought. I could still recall waking early, before dawn, to finish preparations for a project while making sure her breakfast was ready. I was the foundation of that family, the quiet provider who never expected thanks or praise. My wife, God rest her soul, had been my partner in those dreams, her strength beside mine, steady and unwavering. After she passed, the weight grew heavier. It was up to me alone then, to hold the pieces together and shield them from the cold world. I bought groceries, fixed leaky faucets, and held grandkids whose laughter was the only balm to that aching loneliness. My wife, God rest her soul, had been my partner in those dreams, her strength beside mine, steady and unwavering. After she passed, the weight grew heavier. It was up to me alone then, to hold the pieces together and shield them from the cold world. I bought groceries, fixed leaky faucets, and held grandkids whose laughter was the only balm to that aching loneliness. I was proud but tired, bruised but resolute. Every penny saved, every moment sacrificed was meant to build a future, a safety net woven with love. And yet now, this future was threatened. Betrayal had crept inside my home, invading the sacred trust I had placed in my daughter's husband. That man, who owed everything to the roof over his head and the kindness I extended, was plotting to unravel it all. The sting of such deception cut deeper than any wound I had ever endured. How many times had I told myself that family was everything, that blood meant loyalty, respect, and protection? I felt the bitter flames of disillusionment blaze within me, scorching the very bedrock of those beliefs. But beneath the hurt was something else, a quiet indignation, a flame that refused to be extinguished. I was not merely a victim. I was a man who had spent a lifetime mastering problems, solving complexities with calm and precision. This was merely another challenge to be met with careful thought, not blind rage. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting memories flow through me, not to drown in sorrow, but to gather strength and clarity. I thought of how, after my wife's death, I had struggled with nights full of silence. The house that once rang with warmth had become cold and empty, except for the stubborn pulse of love I refused to let fade. That love had embodied every choice I made, every hardship accepted. No matter the cost, I had kept the family intact. Even now, as betrayal threatened to shatter that fragile peace, I clung fiercely to the hope that justice and truth would prevail. Accepting that hope meant accepting what had been broken. It meant acknowledging the arrogance that had infected our family, the greed that had grown like a cancer beneath smiles and empty promises. I did not curse David out loud, but inside I cataloged every slight, every sneer, every careless word that had belied his true nature. The man who called me too old was blind to the reservoir of resolve that comes from decades of experience and sacrifice. The house felt emptier than ever as I sat there alone, but I could almost hear the echoes of my wife's voice, urging calm deliberation. She would have told me to focus not on the betrayal, but on the path forward, the steady work of healing and reclaiming what was rightfully ours. Those memories settled over me like a shield, banishing despair and fueling resolve. Night deepened, and still I stayed at my desk, tracing lines on old engineering blueprints, recalling the patience it took to design and build structures that stood the test of time. This was no different. What had been fractured would be rebuilt, meticulously, with care and intelligence. The man who sought to steal what I had earned was about to learn that patience born of sacrifice was not weakness, but strength. I remembered the thrill of problem solving, how, as an engineer, I had learned to analyze every detail, to anticipate outcome after outcome. This skill would be my weapon now. There was no room for hasty decisions or reckless moves. Retribution would be a calculated process, surgical and just. A final thought settled firmly in my mind. Family was not merely given by blood or name. It was earned through trust, loyalty, and sacrifice. And when that trust was broken, justice was not just necessary, it was sacred. I would not allow the years of love and hard work to be dismissed or destroyed. As dawn began to lighten the edges of the sky beyond my window, a calm certainty filled me. The long road ahead was daunting, but I was ready. My family's future was worth every painstaking effort, every sleepless night to come. I let a small, resolute smile touch my lips. This was my story now, not one of defeat, but of quiet vengeance born from a lifetime of love and endurance. Several mornings passed before I found the right moment to confront what I had begun to suspect for some time. A truth I feared but had to confirm for my plan to take shape. Watching quietly as the household carried on its routine, I noticed subtle changes. Bills left unpaid despite my reminders, strange purchases on bank statements, and an increasing defensiveness whenever I inquired about finances. These signs, though small, were enough to spark my suspicion, but the methodical analyst in me required proof, a clear pattern before unleashing accusations or acting rashly. One quiet afternoon, while David was away, I accessed my laptop, an instrument I had only recently mastered but had grown adept at navigating out of necessity. As a retired engineer, I was familiar with systems, even digital ones, and knew the importance of patience and meticulous attention to detail when sifting through layers of information. I logged into my online accounts and began carefully scanning statements, transfers, and transaction logs, knowing every entry could reveal the truth. What I uncovered confirmed my darkest suspicions. Hidden among legitimate transactions were covert withdrawals, siphoning significant sums from my accounts. Money was quietly funneled into obscure investments under unfamiliar names, and disturbing documents hinted at attempts to conceal these maneuvers. Unauthorized transfers and cleverly disguised withdrawals told a damning story. A tightening knot formed in my stomach, but my resolve steeled. This was no mere mistake. It was calculated theft, betrayal by the man I had trusted most. Determined to grasp the full scope, I pressed further, examining David's belongings when he was out of the house under the pretense of tidying up. In a drawer cluttered with receipts and notes, I discovered hidden digital storage devices, flash drives, and external hard drives that contained falsified contracts and forged signatures. The deception was woven throughout the fabric of his daily life. The man living under my roof, a part of this family, was orchestrating a vast betrayal. When I finally confronted him, his face twisted through denial, anger, and then reluctant admission. "I did it for our future," he murmured, as if that justified his crimes. The brazenness stung worse than the theft itself, like salt in an open wound. I met his gaze steadily. "Your future was built on my sacrifices. You undermine what you owe and spit on the trust that supported you." His arrogance flickered, replaced by a sliver of doubt. That moment summed up everything. No longer the wounded father, I stepped into the role that had always come naturally: strategist, problem solver, engineer. This challenge would be met with precision and calculated steps, each designed to restore what was broken and punish what was stolen. My first task was to map David's financial footprint, to identify chinks in his armor and uncover hidden accounts and falsified documents. I discreetly contacted trusted old colleagues, a retired accountant careful with details, a legal advisor familiar with family disputes, and a cybersecurity expert skilled in tracing digital breadcrumbs. Together, we uncovered a tangled web. Credit lines opened without my approval, fraudulent credit cards bearing slight variations of our names, debts piling up on shaky grounds. David had gambled with money that was never his, weaving lies and creating risky ventures, shielded by my patience and his misplaced confidence. Each new revelation fueled my determined calm rather than blind fury. The scale of deceit was daunting but not insurmountable.
Piece by piece, I built a mosaic of irrefutable evidence. I began crafting a plan, much like a complex engineering project. Objectives were clear: freeze assets before they vanished, cancel unauthorized transfers, compile proof strong enough for court, and protect what belonged to those who earned it with honesty. I organized timelines, prioritized actions, and coordinated with my team to ensure every move was cautious yet effective. In the solitude of my study, surrounded by papers and the quiet hum of my laptop, I found strange comfort in the methodical work. It reminded me of late nights spent poring over blueprints, searching for weaknesses in structures, and devising solutions. This was no different. My wife's steady voice echoed in my mind, reminding me to remain calm and precise. Don't let anger blind you. Use your mind like a clear lens. Truth will prevail if you're patient. That steady presence kept me grounded, focused on measured actions over reckless emotion. This was not blind revenge, but justice, a reclamation of dignity and rightful inheritance. I knew the journey ahead would test me, but I was ready. As dawn softened the edges of the night outside my window, I allowed myself a quiet, resolute smile. The time for hurt was past. Now was the time for quiet, deliberate vengeance, born of a lifetime's worth of love, sacrifice, and unwavering resolve. Transforming my study into an operational nerve center, I was surrounded by walls lined with towering stacks of reports, piled folders crammed full of bank statements, loan applications, withdrawal receipts, and various pieces of correspondence. The chaos of paperwork was daunting to anyone else, but to me it was strangely reassuring, a puzzle waiting to be solved. After all, throughout my years as an engineer, I had come to appreciate complexity not as an obstacle, but as a challenge to systematize, analyze, and overcome. Each night blurred into the next as I meticulously examined every financial detail. I pored over transactions with the precision of an investigator and the patience of a surgeon. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer, no matter how minor or cleverly obscured, was a potential thread to follow. Slowly, like untangling an elaborate knot, patterns began to emerge amid the confusion. I traced the flow of funds slipping quietly from my accounts into shadowy entities and accounts bearing none of our names, but carefully disguised under a veil of aliases and layered through multiple banks and investments. It was a sophisticated cloak woven with intention, but nothing escaped my watchful gaze. Credit cards opened under fabricated names closely resembling ours, unauthorized loans taken out without my consent, documents bearing signatures that looked disturbingly like mine, but in reality were skillfully forged. The lengths to which David had gone to conceal his betrayal were staggering. It wasn't just a minor indiscretion. It was an intricate, sprawling deception stretching across multiple financial institutions, brokered through a labyrinth of shell companies and shadow accounts. Recognizing I could not face this alone, I reached out to a small group of trusted professionals who had long shared my respect for precision and discretion. Ed, a retired accountant who had once managed the books for my engineering firm, possessed an uncanny ability to spot discrepancies hidden in mountains of figures. Anne, a quiet yet formidable legal advisor specializing in family and financial law, provided guidance on securing the necessary injunctions and legal protocols to freeze assets and safeguard legitimate holdings. Michael, a cybersecurity specialist and former colleague of mine, lent his technical expertise, helping decrypt encrypted files, exposing hidden transfer records, and peeling back the layers of digital obfuscation David had relied on. Our collaboration formed a carefully orchestrated campaign. Ed's forensic financial analyses uncovered dormant accounts and tax filings laced with fabricated information. The Anne mapped the legal pathways necessary to paralyze David's illicit access to funds. Michael unearthed encrypted emails and hidden documents, pieces of the ledger that David had sought to lock away in digital darkness. Every new detail added clarity to my understanding of the scope of deception.
With the precision of managing a complex engineering project, I coordinated our efforts, setting timelines, delegating priorities, and strategically directing the investigation's momentum. Much like overseeing the construction of a bridge that must bear immense weight, every financial irregularity uncovered was a potential fracture in the structure I sought to dismantle. I was determined not to allow any crack to go unnoticed. The scale of betrayal unfolded with a harsh clarity. Lines of credit opened in fictitious corporate names. Credit cards issued under fraudulent aliases drained accounts. Loans secured with forged contracts piled debts on what should have been a solid foundation. I was determined not to allow any crack to go unnoticed. The scale of betrayal unfolded with a harsh clarity. Lines of credit opened in fictitious corporate names. Credit cards issued under fraudulent aliases drained accounts. Loans secured with forged contracts piled debts on what should have been a solid foundation. David's reckless attempts to disguise his theft had instead woven a net of undeniable evidence. Despite the magnitude of deceit, I refused to let anger cloud my calculations. Instead, I embraced the detached clarity of a seasoned problem solver. Each weak link discovered in his financial web became a point of attack, a step closer to unmaking the network he had so arrogantly built. Late at night, tirelessly cross-referencing hundreds of documents and digital records, I worked to fortify my legal approach. Every frozen asset, every blocked transfer was a tactical move. I envisioned the entire landscape of deceit as a physical structure, one I could dismantle carefully, piece by piece, without letting it collapse unpredictably or cause unintended damage to innocent family members. My wife's voice often echoed in my mind during these marathon sessions, steady, calm, imbued with wisdom. "Do not let bitterness blind you," I heard her say. "See through the fog." With attention sharpened by love and patience. One evening, Michael presented a trove of decrypted material, spreadsheets, bank records, strategically hidden emails. The data confirmed everything I feared and now had proof for. The immensity of David's cavalier betrayal. The calculated nature of each fraudulent move he had made. It was as if he had constructed an elaborate house of cards, confident it would never fall. With Anne's help, I pieced together a legal strategy as detailed and robust as any engineering blueprint I had ever created. Emergency motions to freeze assets, preemptive steps to halt transfers, an exhaustive buildup of irrefutable evidence. All were crafted with careful precision for prosecution. Ed's comprehensive financial reports connected the crisscrossed fraud into a cohesive narrative, leaving no room for doubt. In all this, I protected the family from the shock that such revelations would bring. The wider circle remained unaware of David's betrayal. This was a delicate military operation that demanded secrecy until victory was assured. Revealing his treachery prematurely might cause irrevocable damage to family bonds, and I was determined to shield my loved ones. David's arrogance, blatant in every miscalculated move, became clearer with each passing day. His fatal error was underestimating the quiet old man, the man he regarded as frail, outdated, and oblivious. He had mistaken patience for weakness and was about to discover the strength that lies in calculated resolve. Weeks melted into one another as the slow but steady dismantling of his financial empire unfolded. Every new piece of evidence gathered, every asset frozen, every loan blocked was a victory, a brick laid in the restoration of order and justice. This was no longer simply about money stolen, but about defending the integrity and honor that defined my family's legacy. In the stillness of my study, surrounded by the glow of a laptop and mountains of paperwork, I found a heavy yet profound peace. The battle was no longer an emotional tempest. It was a deliberate, strategic campaign to reclaim what was mine and to show that justice, when pursued with patience and wisdom, prevails. Aware that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, I steeled myself for the inevitable tests to come. But I was ready. My years of sacrifice, the quiet steel built through decades of toil, had prepared me well. This was a fight for dignity, for truth, and for the future of those I loved most. So, night by night, report by report, I wove the intricate tapestry of plans and proofs, each thread crafted to expose deceit and restore balance. My family's legacy would endure beyond this trial, and David's arrogance, his profound mistake, would be the downfall that finally restored order. The moment to act had finally arrived. Though I met it not with fury, but with the quiet precision that had come to define me during this ordeal. Every move I made was the result of measured calculation, designed to strike precisely where David's illicit grip was weakest, without sounding alarms that might drive him deeper into hiding or cause him to cover tracks more effectively. I began by discreetly canceling the automatic withdrawals and recurring transfers that had been quietly draining my life savings into accounts far beyond my reach and control. The bank officials, when presented with incontrovertible legal documents and the comprehensive evidence laid out by my team, proved not only cooperative but empathetic. Their professionalism amid this chaos was a balm against the betrayal I was unraveling. Each freezing of a transfer, each closure of an account felt like tightening an invisible noose, shrinking the space where David could maneuver with his stolen wealth. David's initial reactions were telling. Confusion first, as suddenly his access faded away. But confusion quickly turned to desperation and then simmering fury. The confrontation came unexpectedly one quiet evening. His eyes were hard, his anger barely contained, as he cornered me in the living room, voice low and strained with emotion. "What in God's name is going on? Why am I suddenly cut off? Do you think you can lock me out like some petty thief?" I held his gaze with calm resolve, refusing to bow before his blistering accusations. "You are a thief. You have stolen from me, from this family, under this same roof. I am simply undoing the damage you inflicted. What I am protecting belongs to us, the family, not to you who squandered it without a thought." My voice held steady, and my words cut through the tension with unyielding certainty. The arrogance that David had worn so brazenly wore thin beneath the weight of my calm. The man who had counted me out as weak now saw clearly the force I wielded, not through rage, but through enduring strength shaped by years of sacrifice and tempered by betrayal. His attempts to justify his behavior sputtered and failed. Empty excuses of necessity or entitlement meant little to me. Word of David's restricted access began to leak silently through the family. Though I had shielded most from the extent of the betrayal, the sudden financial changes could not be hidden forever. Tensions, once subtle, began to percolate in the house. Whispers trailed off in corridors, and suspicious glances replaced previous complacency. David's hastily spun tales did little to quiet doubts. His erstwhile confidence, a mask for greed, gave way to unmistakable frustration and self-doubt. Amid this evolving storm, I maintained a composed demeanor, fully aware that any misstep could unravel my progress or further fracture the family's fragile peace. Every defensive reaction from David was a chink in his armor, proof that my calculated moves were succeeding in weakening his hold. As his access to stolen funds contracted, so too did his influence over our shared lives. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I advanced the next stages of my strategic plan. Freezing assets was merely the initial front. Dismantling the elaborate financial networks David had woven required patience, legal finesse, and careful timing. The mountain of evidence amassed, detailed documentation, expert reports, and digitally secured files stood ready to lay the foundation for a relentless legal assault. Every canceled transaction, every frozen account, every reclaimed asset was a blow dealt to the fragile edifice of deceit David had built. Like a structure slowly dismantled beam by beam, the empire of lies he thought invincible began to collapse beneath the weight of truth and diligence. Within the growing awareness of the household, suspicion morphed into quiet, deliberate inquiry. Trust once blind, now tempered with caution. The man who once strutted with inflated certainty found himself increasingly unmoored, his facade thinning as the consequences of his arrogance closed in. I remained both a protector and a strategist, choosing moments to confront openly and moments to observe silently. This battle was not a spectacle. It was a careful restoration of order and dignity. The family deserved nothing less. David's frustration manifested in erratic attempts to regain control, rushed financial moves, desperate legal filings, last-ditch efforts to evade responsibility. Yet, with every such maneuver, my legal case grew stronger, my defenses more impenetrable. The layers of evidence I'd painstakingly gathered proved overwhelmingly intact, resistant to his wild, panicked flailing. This balance required immense discipline. Years of experience taught me that impulsive retaliation would ruin the delicate architecture of my plan. Patience, sometimes the hardest virtue, became my keenest weapon. Between these battles, reflective silence often filled my evenings. From a man quietly betrayed, I had become someone with authority, steeled by pain but not corrupted by it. The betrayal weighed heavily, yes, but it also forged an unshakable strength. This was no simple revenge. It was a reclamation, a defense of the legacy for which I had labored all my life. The image of home as a sanctuary, built painstakingly over years of sacrifice and love, remained vivid in my mind. That home was threatened, yes, but it was far from lost. Each legal move, each strategic decision was a brick laid in its reconstruction. David's downfall was unfolding not just in his finances, but in his psyche. The arrogance that had blinded him crumbled, replaced by a growing sense of fear and isolation. The confident man had become a figure undone by his own hubris. The courtroom battle loomed, inevitable and daunting, but I had laid down a solid foundation. I had weakened his defenses, reclaimed power, and prepared my case with unassailable precision. The war was far from over, but its outcome no longer felt in doubt. In the quiet victories and slow, steady progress lay a profound satisfaction, not born of vengeance, but of justice administered patiently and wisely. I was no longer the broken man overwhelmed by betrayal. I had become the guardian of truth, patiently reclaiming what was rightfully mine, piece by careful piece. And as David's world dwindled, as his influence faded and his illusions dissolved, I remained steadfast in the belief that dignity, truth, and family would endure, that justice, persistent and deliberate, would at last prevail. The courtroom held a silence heavier than any room I had ever known. Each breath felt measured. Each glance weighted with the secret tension that had been building for months, years even. As I sat there, the quiet hum of anticipation sharp against the soft shuffling of papers and the distant murmur of voices, I realized this moment was the culmination of everything I had endured. The sacrifices, the betrayals, the relentless pursuit of truth, all condensed into a fragile balance teetering on the edge of judgment. The prosecutor rose and began to methodically lay out the case, his voice clear and deliberate, echoing the precision with which every piece of evidence had been gathered. He spoke of forged signatures that bore the marks of deception so carefully crafted they were initially nearly invisible to all but the most scrutinizing eye. Unauthorized transfers siphoned silently from accounts built up over decades through sweat and perseverance. Fake loan documents, shadow companies, hidden assets, all unraveling beneath the weight of truth. As he spoke, the text I watched David's composure falter. The arrogance that once felt impenetrable chipped away with every fact presented. His face, once flushed with defiance, grew pale. His hands trembled slightly,
betraying the storm of panic swirling beneath his calm exterior. The legal walls that had shielded him for so long now appeared brittle and exposed under the piercing light of evidence. Witness after witness testified, their voices weaving a tapestry of unassailable truth. Friends and colleagues of mine spoke to the integrity that had built the foundations of our family's fortune. Tales of tireless work, of long nights and early mornings, of unwavering dedication, not just to wealth, but to family and honor. Their words added weight and color to the narrative, painting a picture far removed from the cruelties of betrayal. Financial experts stepped forward, rigorously dissecting David's schemes like a masterful surgeon peeling back layers of fraudulent activity. Preserve the original webs of transactions traced and untangled, each one revealing a layer of deceit so intricate it would have impressed any mind trained in subterfuge. Yet it was the courtroom that held the ultimate power, a judge and jury who bore witness not only to numbers and documents, but to the heartbreak and steadfast resolve beneath. When the judge called my name, I rose, feeling the full weight of years pressing on me, yet tempered by a quiet resolve. This was not the time for anger or bitter recriminations. It was my moment to lay bare the heart of the matter, why this battle was more than money, why this was a fight to reclaim broken trust and dignity. "I am not here to seek vengeance," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling within. "I am here to stand for the family I have spent a lifetime building, for the sacrifices made by those long gone, and for the future of those who remain. Every brick of this home, every cent saved, every hardship endured was for them. And to see that legacy threatened by deceit is a wound beyond measure." I spoke of my wife, her strength beside me for so many years, her memory a guiding light through the darkest times. Of the days after her passing, how the weight of responsibility grew heavier, and yet I bore it silently, driven by love more than duty. Of the betrayal that came not just from a man's greed, but from a breach of family trust, the deepest kind of wound there is. Looking out briefly at the courtroom, my gaze settled on the judge with quiet intensity. "This case is about justice," I said, "about ensuring the past is not erased by foolish arrogance, and that the future of my family is no longer clouded by the shadow of fraud." David watched me, no word spoken, but his gaze held a mixture of guilt and defeat. The man who had once scoffed at my age and determination was now a figure diminished, stripped bare by the truth he tried to hide. Throughout the proceedings, I remained calm. I understood that this victory was not solely a matter of court rulings, but a restoration of respect, trust, and peace within my family. Though fractured, we began to find a fragile hope in the light that justice shone. When the verdict was reached, it was as if a heavy burden lifted. David was found guilty on every count: financial fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary responsibility. The judge ordered restitution, seizure of assets, and measures ensuring he no longer controlled what was never his to claim. In the quiet days that followed, returning home felt different. The walls that had long sheltered both love and betrayal now seemed to breathe relief. Sitting in my favorite chair, I allowed myself to reflect, not on what was lost, but on what had been preserved. The family bore the silent scars of trauma, yet conversations grew more open, trust rebuilt brick by patient brick. Though the wounds of betrayal would never fully fade, hope took root anew. This journey had not been about riches. It was about reclaiming honor and safeguarding a legacy forged with sweat and love. Justice had been served, not just in court, but in the hearts of those I sought to protect. Trust, fragile and sacred, must be earned and fiercely guarded. When broken, restoration demands courage and unwavering resolve. And so this story finally was not one of defeat or loss, but of enduring strength.
of a family reclaimed, a father vindicated, and a future rebuilt on the foundation of truth. Returning home after the courtroom's judgment had been handed down, I felt a profound shift settle over everything I knew and held dear. The house, the place that had both sheltered and witnessed a bitter betrayal, seemed to exhale, as if finally freed from the weight of shadows that had hung heavy within its walls. The familiar creak of floorboards beneath my feet, the soft murmur of distant conversations, even the way sunlight filtered through the curtains came to me with a new clarity and gentleness. I sank slowly into my favorite chair, the worn leather cool beneath my hands, and I allowed myself to pause. So much had transpired. The shock of betrayal, the sharp sting of disillusionment, the painstaking fight to reclaim what was mine. Not just possessions, but trust, honor, and the future my wife and I had envisioned. And now, as I sat in that quiet, steady light, I felt a fragile peace mingled with the raw edges of loss. The scars left by David's deception would be long-lasting. There was no escaping that. The echoes of broken trust continued to ripple through family conversations, moments of silence, the tentative glances exchanged across rooms. Yet, amid the fragility, a new strength was slowly beginning to emerge. The family, scarred but unbowed, began to rebuild. With each cautious conversation, each step toward honesty, bricks of trust were gently laid, forming the foundation of something renewed. This journey had never truly been about money or legal victories. It was about something far deeper, the reclamation of a legacy built with steadfast love and sacrifice. Our family's story was one of endurance, a testament to the power of patience and unwavering hope. Every sleepless night, every extra shift, every sacrifice made over decades was not merely for accumulation, but for the security, the dignity, and the lasting bond of those I loved. Justice, in its truest form, had finally been served. Not only in the stern pronouncements delivered from the judge's bench, but within the hearts of those I fought to protect. It was a justice marked not by vengeance, but by clarity and purpose, the kind that mends rather than destroys. Trust, I realized more profoundly than before, is a delicate and sacred thing. It is born of honesty, but must be maintained with vigilance and care. It cannot be handed out freely, it is earned daily, through actions and consistency. When shattered, as ours was, restoration demands something extraordinary: courage to forgive, wisdom to rebuild thoughtfully, and the resolve to never allow shadows to creep in unnoticed again. In those quiet moments of contemplation, gratitude found its way quietly into my heart. Gratitude not just for the victory, but for the strength born through suffering and the hope that springs eternal in the face of adversity. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided and broken in his own home. I was someone tempered by fire, a guardian of truths hard-won and fiercely held. The house I called home, built brick by brick through years of sacrifice, stood as a silent sentinel to all we'd endured. It was more than walls and roof. It was a symbol, a beacon of resilience that refused to crumble. Here, in this sanctuary, love and determination lingered. Here was the heart of a family reclaimed and a future reclaimed with it. This was not an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter where lessons learned would serve as beacons of caution and strength, where the family we were could grow together, held firm by truth, respect, and a shared commitment to protect what mattered most. I closed my eyes for a moment and made a silent vow to protect this legacy with every fiber of my being, to cherish the bonds forged in fire, and to guard this home against any who might seek to sow deceit or arrogance within it again. Trust is never an entitlement. It is a hard-earned treasure, and when it is broken, it calls not for passive despair, but for the relentless pursuit of justice and restoration, whatever the cost. This is my story, the story of a father betrayed but unbroken, A man who faced the storm with patience and clarity, who rebuilt from ruin with love and unwavering resolve. And in the end, justice prevailed. The family endured, and a future brighter and more honest was born from the foundation of truth.